Twist Scientist. Scientist is the name when I ever read it. Yeah. So there's actually a really great series. There is Iggy Peck, Architect,
Yes.
Rosie Revere, Engineer, and now there is Ada Twist, Scientist. This is the newest one. And this is actually great in particular to teach kids about predicting and inferencing, so what you think is going to actually happen in the book. In particular with Ada Twist Scientist, but I'm going to do it with a couple things. So I start when I do this by teaching them usually one strategy at a time, and usually I'll pull a book, a text that actually really lends itself to that as a model text and do it with that. I'm going to do it a little differently with you guys because I'm going to assume that you've learned a couple of these and can apply some of them. But if I was actually doing this in the classroom, I would go one at a time, showing them, and then they would practice it. So I'm going to do a couple of them. But it's called Ada Twist Scientist. Ada Marie, said not a word till the day she turned 3. She bounced in her crib and looked all around, observing the world, but not making a sound. She learned how to climb and made her big break, with a trail of chaos left in her wake. She ran through the day, chasing each sound in sight, and didn't slow down till she conked out at night. If I was still doing connecting, I may say, that kind of sounds like my sister. When she was little, she never stopped. All day long, she'd be running around and making a mess all over. Does this sound like any of your siblings?
I don't know the word conk. Would you expand on that?
Good question. I will kind of look around, and often I will stop and say vocab, because conk is not a common word. Second graders probably will know it, but some may not. So yeah, I would stop and actually ask them. And what I would actually show if I was doing connection is after saying that, I would take a Post-it and say, I'm actually going to write this down because I had a great connection, and write down, this sounds like my sister. Her parents were frazzled, but tried not to freak, as Ada grew bigger and still did not speak. Clearly, young Ada, with lots in her head, would have something to say when it ought to be said. That's just what happened. When Ada turned 3, she tore through the house on a fact-finding spree and climbed up the clock just as high as she could. Her parents yelled, "Stop!" as all good parents would. Ada's chin quivered, but she did not cry. She took a deep breath, and she simply asked, why? I'm wondering kind of how she's feeling and what happened. How are they feeling now? All of a sudden, she just started speaking. Why does it tick, and why does it talk? Why don't we call it a grandfather clock? Why don't we call it a granddaughter clock? Why are there pointy things stuck to a rose? Why are there hairs up inside of your nose? She started with why, and then what, how, and when. By bedtime, she came back to why once again. She drifted to sleep as her dazed parents smiled at the curious thoughts of their curious child, who wanted to know what the world was about. They kissed her and whispered, "You'll figure it out." Her parents kept up with their high-flying kid, whose questions and chaos both grew as she did. Even Miss Greer found her hands were quite full when young Ada's chaos wreaked havoc at school. But this much was clear about Miss Ada Twist. She had all the traits of a great scientist. I wonder if there were some other things that she did. I wonder what else she did that wreaked havoc. And I would probably take a Post-it and actually write that down and put it in my book. Ada was busy that first day of spring, testing the sounds that mockingbirds sing, when a right in her nose. A pungent aroma that curled up her toes. Zowie, said Ada, which got her to thinking. What is the source of that terrible stinking? How does a nose know there's something to smell? And does it still stink if there's no nose to tell? She rattled off questions and tapped on her chin. She started to start where she ought to begin. A mystery, a riddle, a puzzle, a quest. This was the moment that Ada loved best. I wonder really what it could be. I don't know what's making that smell. Does anyone notice anything that may make you think, what could that smell be? Something I'm wondering in a prediction. I think, just by looking at the picture, that it may be the shoes that are being walked by, but I don't know. Ada did research to learn all she could of smelling and smells, both the stinky and good. One hypothesis Ada thought could be true. The terrible stink came from Dad's cabbage stew. She tested and tested, but soon Ada knew it was time to come up with hypothesis 2. I once did an experiment like this, but it wasn't with smelling things. I wanted to see how many different things I could cook. I've got to tell you, it turned out terrible. I'm going to write that down as a connection. Then zowie! That stink struck again, just like that. Hypothesis 2. It's caused by the cat. That cat couldn't make such a stink on its own. It needed perfume and some fancy cologne. So young Ada tested. The test was a flop. She started again, but her parents yelled, stop. Ada Marie, to the thinking chair now. By the time we count 3. Enough, said her mother. That's it, said her dad. Her parents were frustrated, frazzled, and mad. Why? Ada questioned. Her mother said no. What? Ada queried. Her father said go. I wonder why her parents are frustrated and frazzled. It kind of makes me think, if this was in my house, and I saw kids running around, and do you remember when you were running around the classroom? Sometimes I get a little frustrated and frazzled too, especially when you make a mess. What? Ada queried. Her father said, go. You ruined our supper. You've made the cat stink. Enough with your questions. Now sit there and think. She looked at her parents. Her heart turned to goo. Poor Ada Twist didn't know what to do. I wonder why they want her to think. Do you think that's going to help her? If I was writing this, and I was writing a stop and jot, I would write a W and say, I wonder why they want her to think. Do they think that stopping will help her solve the hypothesis? She sat all alone by herself in the hall, and Ada once more could say nothing at all. And so Ada sat, and she sat, and she sat, and she thought about science and Stu and the cat, and how experiments made such a big mess. Does it have to be so? Is that part of success? Are messes a problem? And while she was thinking, what was the source of that terrible stinking? Ada Marie did what scientists do. She asked a small question, and then she asked 2. And each of those led to 3 questions or more, and some of these questions resulted in 4. As Ada got thinking, she really dug in. She scribbled her questions and tapped on her chin. She started at why, and then what, how, and when. At the end of the hall, she reached why once again. Her parents calmed down, and then they came back to talk. They looked at the hallway and just had to gawk. No patch of their paint could be seen on the wall. The thinking chair now was the great thinking hall. They watched their young daughter and sighed as they did. What would they do with this curious kid who wanted to know what the world was about? They smiled and whispered, we'll figure it out. And that's what they did, because that's what you do when your kid has a passion and a heart that is true. They remade their world. Now they're all in the act of helping young Ada sort fiction from fact. She asks lots of questions. How could she resist? It's all in the heart of a young scientist. I have a really interesting question. I wonder why she's drawing. Is that something she uses to help solve the problem? That's a question that I have when I'm reading this, and I would put it as a question too. And as for that smell, what can Ada Twist do but learn all she can with her friends in grade 2? Will they discover that stink that curls toes? Well, that is the question, and someday, who knows? So when I do this, I do think alouds a lot, actually, when I taught 2nd grade in particular. It's a really good way to kind of show your thinking when you are doing these tasks and really show them what they should be starting to say in their heads as they're reading. But it also is a good way to model, especially what you would do with Stop and Jot. I didn't do it all for you, so I would actually stop and write